What would you do if you woke up one morning to find your entire livelihood burning to the ground? That was the question slamming into my skull as I shot upright in bed, my heart hammering like a drum. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that acrid, stinging smell of smoke drifting through my bedroom window. Maybe it was just someone's fireplace, or a backyard bonfire carried in by the wind. But when I swung my legs over the side of the bed and glanced outside, my stomach dropped. A wall of flames towered into the sky, bright and hungry, crackling like it had been waiting all night for its moment to destroy everything I'd worked for. I didn't waste time throwing on a coat. My boots barely made it onto my feet before I was sprinting across the frozen ground, the bitter morning air slapping me awake. The fire roared, swallowing the hay bales I'd spent months stockpiling for the winter. The heat blasted against my skin as I reached for the hose, my fingers fumbling with the nozzle, but the moment I squeezed the trigger, I knew it was useless. The stream of water was nothing against the inferno. I might as well have been throwing a glass of water onto a house fire. Behind me, my cows bellowed nervously, shifting in their pens as smoke curled across the farm. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, but I already knew the truth. I was too late. By the time the fire department arrived, there wouldn't be anything left but charred remains and the sickening stench of burnt hay. Minutes later, the firefighters pulled up, shouting orders as they unfurled their hoses. They fought the flames with professional precision, but I could see it in their faces. They weren't here to save anything. They were here to contain what was left. When the fire finally died, all that remained was blackened stumps where my hay bales had once stood. I stood there, my breath fogging in the cold air, the devastation settling deep in my bones. Thousands of dollars, gone. My entire winter feed supply, reduced to nothing. Then, the fire chief approached me, his face grim as he kicked at the scorched ground. "This wasn't an accident," he said, his voice heavy. "This was arson." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had done this. Someone had deliberately set fire to my farm, my animals' food, my hard work. And then it hit me. Karen. My blood boiled hotter than the fire itself. I clenched my fists, my breath coming out in sharp bursts of white vapor in the cold morning air. Karen. The thought of her alone was enough to send rage pulsing through my veins. It wasn't just a suspicion, it made too much sense. She had been complaining about my hay bales for months, calling them an eyesore, claiming they ruined her view. She had even threatened to take it up with the HOA, as if they had any jurisdiction over my farm. I had shrugged her off, thinking she'd eventually move on to another petty complaint, but clearly, I had underestimated just how far she was willing to go. I turned to the fire chief, my voice tight with frustration. "Do you have any proof?" He exhaled, shaking his head. "Not yet. We'll have to investigate, but if you have security cameras, check them." Security cameras. A flicker of hope cut through my anger. My cousin, Travis, had insisted on installing them last spring after a pack of raccoons broke into my feed shed. At the time, I thought it was overkill, but now? Now those cameras might be the one thing that could bring Karen down. Without another word, I stormed back into the house, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone and dialed Travis. 15 minutes later, he was at my place, his laptop open on the kitchen table, fingers flying across the keyboard as he scrolled through the footage. I hovered over his shoulder, tapping my fingers anxiously against the counter. Come on, I muttered. Then Travis stopped, rewound, and froze the screen. There. I leaned in, my heart hammering. The grainy footage showed a shadowy figure moving near the hay bales late last night. Dressed in dark clothes, they crept close, a small flicker of light sparking in their hands. A second later, flames erupted, devouring the dry hay in an instant. The figure took a step back, watching for just a moment before hurrying away. It wasn't crystal clear, but it didn't need to be. The height, the build, it all matched Karen. Travis sighed. It's good, but it's not solid proof. She could argue it's someone else. I gritted my teeth. That was the problem. Karen was smart in the worst way. She wasn't going to confess out of guilt because she didn't have any. If I wanted her to go down for this, I needed more. I grabbed my jacket and marched out the door, rage boiling just beneath my skin. I didn't bother knocking when I reached Karen's house. I pounded on her door, and after a few agonizing seconds, it swung open. She stood there, her expression smug as ever, sipping from an oversized coffee mug like she had all the time in the world. "Well, if it isn't Farmer Boy," she drawled, leaning against the doorframe. "What brings you to my doorstep at this ungodly hour?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "You know exactly why I'm here." Her eyes flickered with something, amusement, maybe, but she covered it quickly. "No, actually, I don't. My hay bales are gone. Burned. And I think you had something to do with it." Karen blinked at me, then let out a slow, exaggerated sigh. "That's terrible," she said, sounding completely unconvincing. Then she took another sip of coffee. "But I was at my book club last night. You can ask any of the ladies. We were discussing Great Expectations." I narrowed my eyes. "The last book club meeting you had was just an excuse to drink wine and gossip about the mailman." She smirked. Multitasking is a skill. Every word out of her mouth made my blood pressure skyrocket, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing my temper wouldn't get me anywhere. "Look," I said, taking a slow breath. "I have security footage. Someone was at my farm last night, setting the fire. It looks an awful lot like you." For the first time, something flickered across her face, a tiny crack in her confidence. But she recovered fast. "Please," she scoffed. "If you had actual proof, you wouldn't be standing here trying to scare me. You'd be calling the cops." I clenched my jaw. She was right. What I had wasn't enough to get her arrested. But it was enough to make her nervous. "Just know this, Karen," I said, stepping closer, lowering my voice. "I'm not letting this go. If you did this, I'll prove it. And when I do, you're going down for arson." She just smiled, taking another sip of coffee. "Good luck with that, Farmer Boy." I turned and walked away, my blood boiling. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sat on my porch that evening, staring at the charred remains of what used to be my winter hay supply. The scent of burnt grass still lingered in the air, clinging to everything like a reminder of what had been taken from me. Karen thought she had won. She thought she was untouchable, that she could waltz away from this without a single consequence. But that was her mistake. She believed she was smarter than me, smarter than the law, smarter than everyone. That kind of arrogance? It always led to a fall. Travis sat beside me, scrolling through the security footage on his laptop for the 100th time. "It's definitely someone with her height and build," he muttered. "But it's too blurry. No way a court would take this as solid proof." I ran a hand down my face, exhaling slowly. "We need something stronger. A confession. Something undeniable." Travis smirked. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Oh, I'm thinking exactly what you're thinking." Karen was smart, but her biggest weakness was that she was too damn cocky. She thought she had covered her tracks. She thought she'd outsmarted me. And that meant she wasn't on guard anymore. All it would take was the right kind of pressure, and she'd slip up. The next morning, I paid her another visit, but this time, I wasn't stomping up to her door with accusations. I knocked, and when she opened it, I made sure to look more defeated than angry. I rubbed the back of my neck and let out a sigh, shifting uncomfortably on my feet. "I just came to say that I overreacted yesterday," I said, keeping my voice low, tired. I don't have any proof, and I probably won't get any. I guess I just have to accept that the fire was an accident. Karen raised an eyebrow, studying me. Look at you, she said after a moment, tilting her head with a smirk. Finally using some common sense. I forced out a chuckle, shaking my head. Yeah, I guess I was just upset. That was a lot of hay. Cost me a fortune. I don't even know how I'll recover from it. She took a slow sip of her coffee, leaning against the doorframe, completely at ease. That's what happens when you put a bunch of dry grass in one place. Fires. Her voice was casual, almost lazy, like she was throwing out an obvious fact. My pulse quickened, but I didn't react. Maybe you should be more careful next time, she added. I nodded, pretending to absorb her oh-so-helpful wisdom. It's just weird, though. The fire department said it started from an open flame. Like someone actually said it. Karen's smirk didn't falter, but something flickered in her eyes. Well, that's ridiculous. Who would do something like that? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But I guess I have to let it go. No evidence, no case, right? She smiled again, the same insufferable, self-satisfied smirk that made my blood boil. Exactly. I gave her a slow nod, then turned and walked away. The moment I got back to my house, I pulled out my phone and played the recording. Every single word she had just said had been captured. Travis grinned when I played it for him. She's too arrogant. I nodded. Now we just need something bigger. Something that leaves no room for doubt. That was when the idea hit me. Karen thought she had gotten away with it. She wouldn't be careful. She'd be overconfident. The next day, I set my plan in motion. I borrowed a fog machine from the community theater, called in a couple of my farmhands, and staged a fire drill. We set up a controlled burn in a fire pit a good distance away from the main property, ensuring there was no real danger. Then I made sure Karen saw. Right on cue, the moment smoke started rising, Karen burst out of her house, her face pale. Not again, she shrieked, panic lacing her voice. Sheriff Lawson, who had conveniently stopped by to check on things, raised an eyebrow at her reaction. I stepped forward, keeping my face neutral. Not again? I asked casually. Karen stiffened. I meant, fires happen all the time. This town is just full of careless people. Lawson crossed his arms. Is that so? You seem pretty jumpy for someone with nothing to hide. Karen let out a forced laugh, flipping her hair like she wasn't standing in the middle of a disaster of her own making. Oh, please, Sheriff. This is ridiculous. I have better things to do than talk about some silly little farm fire. Lawson didn't look convinced, but he let it go, for now. Back at the farm, Travis was already working on the next step. I called a few of her book club ladies, he said, groaning. Guess what? Karen left early that night. Said she had a headache. Around the same time the fire started. A slow smile spread across my face. That was the final nail in her coffin. I handed everything over to Lawson, the recording, the security footage, the witness statements. He listened, nodding slowly. That's a lot of circumstantial evidence. I stiffened. Circumstantial? Lawson chuckled. Relax. It's enough to get a warrant. And if I had to guess, I wouldn't be surprised if we find a little more proof. The next morning, the sheriff's department pulled up in front of Karen's house. I made sure to be outside, casually fixing a fence, just so I could watch the chaos unfold. Karen stormed out, her eyes wild with indignation. What is happening? Lawson stepped forward, all business. We have a warrant to search your property for evidence related to the fire on Jake's farm. Karen's face went pale. I don't have anything like that. This is harassment. Lawson ignored her, and within 20 minutes, one of the deputies emerged from her garage, holding a plastic bag. "Sheriff, you're gonna want to see this." Lawson took one look at it, then turned to Karen. "You wanna explain why your designer boots are covered in ash?" Karen's mouth opened, then snapped shut. For the first time, she looked genuinely panicked. I stepped forward, arms crossed. "Looks like you stepped in your own mess, Karen." She whirled on me, her expression twisting into rage. "You set me up." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean I forced you to set my hay on fire?" Lawson let out a chuckle, shaking his head. Karen sputtered, trying to come up with an excuse, but nothing came. As they placed her in the squad car, she turned and hissed, "You think this is over, Jake?" I met her glare with a smirk. "Oh, I'm pretty sure it is." The moment the car pulled away, I let out a long breath. Karen had finally gotten what she deserved. But something told me the best part was still yet to come. The town was buzzing before the sun even set that evening. News of Karen's arrest spread like wildfire, jumping from neighbor to neighbor, whispered over grocery store aisles, and discussed with barely contained excitement at the local diner. For once, I didn't mind being the center of attention. People stopped by the farm, not just to shake my hand, but to drop off casseroles, pies, and fresh-baked bread, as if I had taken down an outlaw instead of an insufferable HOA tyrant. I accepted each one with a grin, but I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to go down without a fight. She had money, connections, and a massive ego. No way would she let herself be humiliated like this without trying to wriggle out of it. Travis was one step ahead as usual. He sat on my porch, scrolling through his phone, shaking his head in amusement. "You're not gonna believe this," he muttered. I leaned over to look. "Oh, let me guess, she hired a lawyer?" "Oh yeah. Some big shot named Ethan Caldwell. Real slick type, charges by the hour, the kind that loves to twist the truth." He snorted. "And get this, his whole defense strategy? Blame it on some mysterious drifter. Says you've got no real proof Karen did it." I let out a low laugh, rubbing my temples. "Right, because random drifters just wander into town looking to burn down farms." Travis grinned. "Oh, it gets better. Caldwell is claiming you set Karen up, that this is some personal vendetta against her." I nearly choked on my coffee. "She burned my damn farm down." "Apparently, you torched your own hay just to ruin her life," Travis said dryly. "Because that makes sense." I should have been furious, but honestly, I just found it hilarious. Karen was desperate, flailing for anything that might get her out of this. But she had underestimated just how much the town despised her. The trial was set for the following week, and when the day arrived, I walked into the courthouse feeling like I was about to watch the season finale of a show I had been waiting for. Karen sat at the defendant's table, wearing a pastel pink suit that made her look more like a real estate agent than someone on trial for arson. Her lawyer, Ethan Caldwell, had the smug, overly polished look of a man who thought he could talk his way out of anything. I took my seat next to Sheriff Lawson, who leaned over and muttered, "I can't wait to see her squirm." The prosecutor laid out the case with ease. The security footage, the recording of her own words, the burned boots found in her garage, it was a solid pile of evidence. Caldwell did his best to poke holes in it, but every time he made a point, the prosecutor calmly countered. I could see the frustration creeping into his expression, and every now and then, Karen would shoot him a sharp glare. Then came the moment that sealed the deal. The prosecutor played the footage from my fire drill trap, specifically the part where Karen had panicked and yelled asterisk, "Not again." Asterisk before realizing her mistake. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Caldwell stood up, clearing his throat. "My client simply has an understandable fear of fire." The prosecutor didn't even blink. And yet, when she was first questioned, she claimed the fire was an accident and that she wasn't concerned at all. So which is it? Fear or indifference? Caldwell faltered. Karen's jaw tightened. Then came the final blow. The prosecutor called a new witness to the stand. Greg, Karen's own partner. A hush fell over the courtroom as he walked up and took his seat. He looked tense, like a man who had been holding onto something for too long. "I never thought I'd be doing this," he muttered, rubbing a hand down his face. "But I can't keep covering for her." Karen shot up from her chair, her face twisted in rage. "Greg, what are you doing?" He avoided her gaze, looking straight ahead. "Telling the truth." Silence hung thick in the air. "She came home that night smelling like smoke," Greg continued. Mumbling about how she'd finally taught that farmer boy a lesson. Karen was seething now, her fists clenched, but Greg wasn't done. "She tossed her boots in the garage. Didn't even think about it. I saw the ash on them, and I kept quiet because I figured it would all blow over. But then she kept lying. Kept making excuses. Trying to pin it on someone else. I can't be part of that anymore." The courtroom erupted. Karen looked like she was going to explode. Her lawyer slumped back in his chair, defeated. The judge called for order before finally announcing the verdict. Karen was found guilty of arson and sentenced to community service and a hefty fine. No jail time, but the punishment was poetic enough to make up for it. Because the woman who had spent months complaining about my farm? The one who had called it an eyesore, who had torched my livelihood just to get her way. She was about to become my newest farmhand. The first day of Karen's community service was, without a doubt, the most satisfying moment of my life. She arrived at my farm wearing oversized designer sunglasses, a brand new flannel shirt that had probably cost more than my entire tractor, and an expression of pure disgust. I greeted her with a shovel and a smirk. "Welcome to the job, Karen. Hope you like manure." She recoiled like I had just handed her a live snake. "This is beneath me," she sneered, her voice dripping with entitlement. "Not according to the court," I replied, crossing my arms. "Now get to work." For the next 2 months, Karen was forced to do everything she had once ridiculed. She shoveled manure, repaired fences, stacked hay bales, each task more humiliating than the last. The best part? The town didn't let her live it down. Everywhere she went, people snickered. Someone even printed t-shirts that said "Justice for the hay bales." I bought one and made sure to wear it every time she came to work. Every time she grumbled, I reminded her that it was either this or jail. She didn't talk back much after that. But Karen's real punishment wasn't the labor, it was the fact that the HOA, the group she had once controlled with an iron fist, had completely disowned her. After her conviction, she was removed from the board, her influence stripped away overnight. Her so-called friends stopped taking her calls, refusing to be associated with her disgrace. By the time her sentence was up, she was barely a shadow of the smug, self-important woman she once was. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any better, Travis came by one afternoon, grinning as he held up his phone. "You're gonna love this," he said, turning the screen toward me. It was a real estate listing. Karen's house. She was moving. "Guess she finally had enough," I said, leaning back in my chair. Or maybe she realized she messed with the wrong farmer. Either way, peace had finally returned to my farm. The hay bales were restocked, my animals were fed, and best of all, Karen was gone. But here's the real question: if she had gotten away with it, how far do you think she would have gone? Have you ever had to deal with a Karen like this? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.